Hey guys, it's Mr. Mini Painter, and today I'm showing you how I painted this Dark Future Terrain pack by Marvel Crisis Protocol, issued by Atomic Mass Games. It's quite a large pack, giving you all of these things, and I'm going to show you how I did it. So first I base coated everything with a black primer. Because it's going to be dark, I'm covering it all with black, it's easier. There are some different surfaces here, some stone, some metals. I'm going to show you how I did these pipes. And I'm using a technique while I'm using this sponge. These are kind of little makeup sponges you can buy very cheap. I think I bought 100 for about $2. And as you see here, I'm stippling this lead belcher on, and you instantly create a very nice shaded kind of end result with some shaded areas, some darker, some brighter areas, depending on how much pressure you give your sponge. I'm not being really careful here because I'm touching a lot of the stone. The reason I'm doing this is because it's a very quick way to give your model a base coat, and the only thing you have to do afterwards is kind of clean up the parts that do not need this metal look. Afterwards I'm using a dry brush, a smaller one, to apply some Riser Rusts to the model. I wanted it to be some weathered down drain pipes, so there should be some rust here and there, especially around the joints. The parts where it's connected or going through these stone parts. So I'm going quite heavy on it, and in the end I toned it down a little bit. So it's just depending on the way you want your end result to be, I guess. So feel free. After this, it's time to clean up the non-metal parts, and for that I just used Abaddon Black again and went all around the model to paint all the stone parts back to black. Then for the stone, I'm using Mornifang Brown as a base color. Make sure to cover every nook and cranny of this because there's a lot of edges here and I don't want them to be black. Take your time. And after this, I'm using this sponge again and apply some Deathclaw Brown, or you can also use Scrag Brown if you want. And the reason I'm stippling this on here is because I want kind of a stone look, and stone is never one even color. It's a combination of darker and brighter tones. And that's what I'm trying to achieve here by using this sponge on the big surfaces. Of course, the smaller ones, the edges, I'm using the dry brush again and kind of stippling this paint on as we go. And I'm doing that throughout the entirety of this paint job. So again, the second highlight is Cadian Flesh Tone. I'm using my dry brush to kind of stipple it on the hard to reach places, and for the flat and larger areas, I'm using the sponge again. Or you can use a large dry brush if you have one. What you're trying to get here is a non-even surface. So dry brush is ideal. Next I'm highlighting this again with the mixture of Cadian Flesh Tone and Ushabti Bone. So I'm keep brightening this up, focus on the edges, but make sure to cover the entirety of the model because it's a nice stone look with some darker and brighter tones, not really depending on light or whatever. You can do that in a final stage if you want. Hold your dry brush kind of flat like this so that all the unevenness is accentuated, which gives you a beautiful result. And then we're done with the stone area, and I'm using some Null Oil on the corners of the metal parts, so the parts where they are disappearing in the stone areas or the edges. And the reason I'm doing this is that it gives a nice kind of weathered look, also gives it a bit of depth, and well, I really like the end result. I'm also focusing a little bit on the bottom because it's naturally darker. And that's it for these drain pipes, or whatever they are called. Next are these illuminated pylons. Also a base coat of black. And we're going to repeat the same process by starting with Mornfang Brown on the stone areas of this model, which is the sides, the middle of the base, the top part of the obelisk, or whatever we call it. And there's some stone in the middle, the base of the obelisk. I'm using a fairly large brush here because it's big areas. And that's it for our first color. Before I'm starting highlighting, I'm using lead belcher and I'm holding my brush flat, so you leave the recessed areas nice and black. You can achieve the same result with some null oil in the back, but I like this better. And I'm actually going to use some null oil later on also, but well, the darker the better. Again, I'm using my sponge to kind of stipple this metal look all over the larger area of the pylon and the ornament in the front. You can do that with a brush as well if you want, but again, this way you get some darker areas and the insides of the shapes will remain nice and dark, which will help for the end effect. There's something on the back here, make sure to take that as well. And then we're gonna start highlighting by using Deathclaw Brown on the stone parts. I'm using a large dry brush to kind of wipe it on. You can do that with sponge as well, but there are some hard to reach areas, so make sure that you have a small sponge then. And the problem is that ornament in front of the part I'm painting here is quite hard to reach, so for me a dry brush worked best. Next we're highlighting it with some pure Cadian flesh tone. Again, the same process. Dry brush parts of it, kind of stipple it on if you can. It doesn't have to be even because it's a stone look and it's never a solid color. So it's okay to skip some places here and there. It adds to the general look of the model. And as a last highlight, we're repeating the same process with a mixture of Cadian flesh tone and Ushabti bone. As we did before, kind of stipple it on, make sure that's an uneven look. You get kind of a marble look and feel. It looks really stony and broken, old, and that's what we're going for. Then, as I said, some null oil on the metal parts. And after that, I'm using white scar on the insides of the triangles on this obelisk as a base color, because we're going to make it a pink glow and it should be very bright. So make sure to have a bright background. You can use gray seer if you want, because white scar tends to be a bit difficult to paint. It's like a thicker paint, so you make sure to thin that down. Next, I'm using a dry brush to kind of create an area of glow. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want it to be really bright around this triangle, because it's the source of the light coming out. And for the pink part, I'm using Emperor's Children as a base color, which is a nice dark pink, a solid color. Make sure to take the edges as well, because it's glowing, so it's going to take a lot of the outside as well. And we're going to use a different technique further on. And for this, I'm using a dry brush. Large dry brush, because we want a large area with a kind of fall off on the glow. So take every corner of this pylon and use the same technique. Now I went a bit too far, so what I did here is the insides of the risen panels I recoated with lead belcher, so that the glow would only touch the very edges of the higher areas. It's up to you, it's just a matter of taste, I guess. After this, I decided to take some null oil and just apply it to the very ends of every crevice here to make the effect a bit more visible, so a larger transition from dark to bright. Again, this is just an optional thing and depends on taste. Next, fulgrim pink to highlight the pink areas. And what I did here is did some edge highlight around the raised areas to make it look like it's a circle glowing around the triangle. And I added some details inside here, like a kind of prism emanating all this light. And to emphasize the source of light, I used pure white scar for the absolute middle of this glowy part. So it looks really, really bright. And you can touch some of the corners here and there of the parts on the outside if you want, just to make them even more brighter. Next, I used a dry brush and some Stormhost silver to touch the top of the pyramid and the edges, making it look nice and sharp and edgy. And just give a little more color to this more or less gray model. Silvery, right? Not gray. Okay, on to the next one. This guy is carrying a large rejuvenation chamber. And we're going to use the same colors as we did before by starting off with Mournfang Brown. That's going to be more or less the entire model because it's a stone guy holding this chamber. We're going to add some color differentiations to this one. The base is basically the same, so we're going to use Deathclaw Brown again, or Scrag Brown if you have it, and a large sponge, and just dab over it the entirety of the model, or use a dry brush for the nooks, for the corners, the hard to reach places. Next up, a highlight of Cadian Flesh Tone, and after that Cadian Flesh Tone with a mixture of Ushabti Bone. So this way we're getting a nice result of shades, darker and brighter areas, and also a differentiation in the colors of brown, the tones of brown used in this model, as we did before. It's gonna look something like this. Make sure to leave the thing on his back just the way it is, because we're gonna touch that with lead belcher. You can use your dry brush on this as well. The top you don't really have to paint because we're gonna glue it to the rest of the model later on. Leave some dark in there. And again, you can apply some null oil to the model, of course. But the more we can achieve up front, the better it looks. Now, to have some extra color, I'm using Carrick Stone on the stones that are standing straight up. I'm using a dry brush, but with a little bit of heavier paint, so I'm not fully covering the stones. You want some color differentiation in this as well, but I wanted them to be a bit different than the rest of those stones. It's more or less like the box art. Otherwise it's just one color. It's boring. Then we're going to start on the guy on the inside of the chamber with a base coat of Mechanicus Standard Grey. I used a dry brush for this as well, so leave some of the black shining through. Once dried, apply a layer of null oil. You can go heavy on this if you want. Once done, leave it to dry and apply a layer of ashen grey, also with a large dry brush. This tones down the darkness of the null oil, but leaves nice shaded areas. I think the downside of oils is that they look a bit shiny, and that's not what you want in a model. At least that's not what I want in a model. Next, I'm highlighting it with some grey cere. First I marked some of the more pronounced areas, and afterwards I used a dry brush to kind of blend it all together. What you want in this rejuvenation chamber is to think of where the light is coming from, because there is some light coming from the front and the back of this character as he is in a glass chamber, but also you can add some ominous light from, for example, the bottom or the top of the model, as if this chamber is lighting him up. Next is some rock art flash for the loincloth around this model. It's a nice kind of dirty look, because I am not really sure they're changing him every day. So it can be a bit dirty, right? Wash it with some Agrex Earth shades to make it even more dirtier. We're gonna let that dry and take our lead belcher back again for all the metal, what are they called? Rings around his ankles, his legs, his arm. And make sure to wash that with some null afterwards. Then back to the rock art flash to retouch all the areas on the loincloth before. For this I used a dry brush, but you can use a small brush if you want. Then the inside, Emperor's Children. I chose to give it a base color of some gray cere or white before, but just the middle, and afterwards I went over it with this Emperor's Children. I did not do so for the lines on his chest. I left them gray because I wanted them to be a bit darker. And in my experience, this Emperor's Children is quite a solid color, so it's bright by itself. Now before we are going to highlight that, I used some gray cere to paint in the eyes. I wanted them to be kind of dead looking, so not really too bright. So the gray is a nice choice, I think. And then some fulgrim pink to highlight the chest. What I did here is painted about half of the lines again, so I left the ends dark, and if you are able to, make sure that the edges of these lines stay dark as well, so it's like an inner glow. And after this I focused around the center of the chest by giving it a kind of a circle, like a glowy edge around it, to emphasize the glow of the inside piece. Next I used Temple Guard Blue to give his hands, his feet and part of the body a nice, strange, mysterious glow. It's kind of a husk, this body, like some dead tissue maybe in a rejuvenation chamber, which you wanted to make to look at a little bit more interesting, right? So add some color here and there. I decided that there was some glow coming from the bottom, so I focused on the lower parts of the miniature, so the bottom part of the shoulders, the chin, the parts below, so to say. Then for the gold parts I used Retributor armor. Make sure to not touch the body, as I did at some points, and you have to repair it. After this, I washed the gold parts with Reichland Flesh Shade. You get some shades, and make sure to let that dry, after which we're going to highlight it with some Liberator Gold. Just focus on the edges of some of those pipes and stuff going in and around his body. And I wanted to take a little bit further, so I mixed some Stormhost Silver in the Liberator Gold. Whoops, there, dropped it there. And only touched the very edges of it to make them look even brighter. Then we're going to continue on the chamber itself. It's a two-part. I did not glue it together because it has to go inside this body, so we're going to paint it as it is. And what I did here is used Abaddon Black on the parts that I wanted to have color, because it's very hard to paint directly on this plastic. It's a bit translucent, as is the end result of the paint job, and you want that to be dark. So I took my time and I went all around with this black on the parts that I wanted to have some sort of color. So it looks something like this in the end. But there is also an inside, and I wanted the bottom and the top of these models to have color as well. So this part here, which is the top, the bottom of the model and the top, I also primed it with a black color, so it's non-translucent. Then all of the edges and sides, I gave it a layer of lead belcher. It's okay to leave some of the black shining through. It's not that big of a deal. The edges are very, very tricky, because if you touch the plastic, the transparent part, you have to clean it up immediately, because it's gonna stick there and it's gonna be visible in the end result, and you do not want that. This took me quite some time, and I accidentally painted this part silver as well, but it's supposed to be a stone look, so I'm gonna correct it later on. Now you have these two halves here, looking quite nice. The inside is also painted with my metal look, as you can see here. You can kind of shade it if you want. And I think it's time to put this together. This part, as I told, should be a different color, so I painted that with Mournfang Brown first. Make sure to leave the bottom part as a metal ring. It's a nice contrast to the stone look. And the rest, the top, everything is covered with brown, and we're gonna basically repeat the same process as we do the rest of the model. But first we're gonna glue this together, as we are not going to be painting inside anymore. So make sure to use a very fine line of paint. There are some outlines that exactly fits this model. And there we have him. This looks really, really great already. And finally, this top part goes on there, which I also primed black. Make sure to let that dry for a sec, and then give it the same color as the rest of the model. Afterwards, I washed it with some Agrax Earthshade, so those tiny details become very visible. Then the insides of these panels are painted with White Scar or Grey Seer if you have it, to give it a nice bright look. And I also decided to do the top. There's not really an image of how this is supposed to look. I thought this was going to be a glowing part as well. So I also covered the insides of these spikes coming out of it and the edge because I wanted to give them a pinkish glow as well. The scarab on the front I painted with Retributor armor. And I highlighted that with some Liberator gold later. Then back to the Emperor's Children for the panels in front and the top part here. And I used a dry brush to kind of paint the insides of the spikes coming out of it, as to imitate a kind of glow. Then Fulgrim Pink to paint in some kind of pattern you want. I chose a cross for this one. This is kind of a prism look. And for the top I decided to make kind of a convergence of powers, I guess, from pylon to pylon here. I thought it looked nice. Again, also with White Scar, just focus on the center of this area to give it an extra bright glow look. I did the same with the top. Just try and stay in the middle and make that more brighter than the rest. It really adds to the total effect of this model. Then some finalization on the rest of this thing. The same mixture of Cadian flesh tone and Ushabti bone for the top. Kind of stipple it on like this with a dry brush if you're able. And then it's time to glue this part to the bottom part. So add some glue here and kind of press it on. It really fits very nice. I had to push a little bit here. That's, I think, because you base coat it, there's some extra thickness. So I had to kind of power through there. But in the end I got it to fit. And that's it for this beautiful rejuvenation chamber. Now I decided to give it a little extra touch by adding some Temple Guard blue on some parts of the outside of the metal. Give it a nice glowy look. It's mysterious, it's outer worlds, so you can go nuts here if you want. And then you get this beautiful result. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I like these transparent parts, and the fact that you're able to paint it even on the inside. It's really satisfying. And then the final piece in this collection of terrain pieces is this tower, this signal tower. I used lead belcher on the metal parts inside. It's kind of a metal, machinery looking thing. And for the base color of the stone, we're going to repeat the same process as we did before by using Mournfang Brown as a base color. It's a large area, you can use a large brush. Afterwards, wash the metal parts with some Nuln Oil. You can go quite heavy on this if you want. And because there are a lot of flat surfaces here, I'm using Cadian flesh tone with a sponge again to kind of stipple this stony effect on there. You want to be as uneven as possible, so make sure to turn your sponge around now and then, or your dry brush if you're using this. Afterwards, the same process, Cadian flesh tone mixed with some Ushabti bone for a brighter look. The bowl on top I painted with rock art flesh. Kind of a stone look. Next, for the flames inside, I used palette witch flesh. And not only the flames, but also the coals or whatever it is that's lying beneath. I wanted them to be glowy, so I painted most of it with palette witch flesh, so we can add some bright effects. Before we do that, I painted the bowl with Agrax Earthshade to create some darkness and some lines. The flames I started with Iron Jaws Yellow, which is a contrast paint, nice and bright, not too bright, for the bottom part of the flames. As we go up, the colors become darker. And for the second color, I used Iandan Yellow, which is kind of an orange yellow. And what you want to try and do here is kind of wet blend them together. So while the paint is wet, kind of mix it so you get a nice transition between the two colors. I'm doing the same with Bile Red for the top part. A nice dark, bright red. Pick out some colors here and there. And for the base, I used this Bile Red as well to create some specks of red glowy parts. You let that dry for maybe 30 seconds and then use Iandan Yellow to go over it. You kind of blend it together, but you have these red specks in the end result. Go around the model until you've covered the entire base. And you get a nice glowing effect. But of course, it's never this color, so we're going to use a different color later on. Clean up the insides of the bowl with some Karak Stone. Give the edges a highlight, some shine here and there if you want. And then we're nearing the end of our paint job here. With Abaddon Black, I painted in the lines, the areas in between those coals. You kind of bring it back to the center. You go darker around the outside and a little bit more bright on the inside. You get this kind of glowing stone effect. I also applied some Abaddon Black to the top of the flames, as if it were smoke or whatever. Just pick out some tiny details here and there. And that way you get a beautiful flame. Now I wanted to have the bottom part of this bowl a little bit in a different color, so I decided to cover it with an extra coat of a contrast paint, Dark Oath Flesh, which kind of blends the glowy parts and the dark parts together in a brown tone. And that's it for all our models. I've got the end results here. I'm really happy with how they turned out, and I hope you are too. Please share with me your end result. I'd love to hear from you, so please leave a comment below the video, and I hope this was of any help to you guys. I will be painting a lot more Marvel Crisis Protocol and other models on this channel, so if you like this kind of videos, please consider subscribing to the channel, leave a comment, leave a like, and I hope to see you in one of my next videos. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye!